My guest today is Lieutenant General Wendy Masiello, a leader whose 36-year career in the US Air Force spanned continents, commands, and contracts worth billions of dollars. From leading acquisition efforts in Iraq and Afghanistan and many other countries to heading the Defense Contract Management Agency, Wendy shaped systems, safeguarded public resources, and transformed how the military does business. Her contributions have been recognized with some of the US military's highest honors, including the Legion of Merit and the Bronze Star, not just for what she achieved, but for how she led with clarity, commitment, and a deep sense of responsibility. And beyond the accolades, what I thought defines Wendy is the humility with which she carries her journey. I'm so looking forward to this conversation about choices, courage, and the values that shape a meaningful life. Very warm welcome to Atlanta Diaries, Wendy, and thank you for sharing your journey and walking this path with me.
Thank you. And I'm really looking forward to it. You had quite the collection of people before me, and I am happy to talk with you about more.
Wonderful. So let's start with the very beginning, Wendy. You were born in Illinois and gradually moved south, eventually settling in West Texas,
Yes.
and then chose the military. So tell us, how did that decision come about? What was your family's reaction? And any fun or memorable stories from that time that still make you smile?
Oh, and that's such a good question. It's a fun story for me. My dad had been in ROTC when he was in college at the University of Illinois. It was right after the Korean War, so they changed the commitment, and he then ended up leaving the ROTC, so never spent time in the Air Force. But that doesn't mean that we didn't spend a lifetime as kids going to air shows and just being exposed to our military and our country and our nation and what it meant to be a member of the services. So I go into college and I become a part of a service organization called Angel Flight. It was at the time a woman-only organization, and our job was to support the ROTC. And in Lubbock, there was an Air Force base called Reese Air Force Base. It was a pilot training base, so we had military members in our community. And I decided that if I was going to be a good angel, I should take an ROTC, a Reserve Officer Training course, just to understand what our military members went through. So I took the course, and in April of my junior year in college, one of my ROTC instructors stopped me and said, "We're giving our last Air Force officers qualifying test this afternoon for this season, and I think you should take it." And I'm going, "Why would I do that?" And he said, "Because I think you'd be a great officer." And as I'm driving to work that afternoon, I walk in the door and I go to my boss and I say, "Ma'am, I forgot I had a test this afternoon. I have to go back and take this test."
Wow.
So I went back and I took the test. And in the end, I decided that I was going to join the Air Force. And my dad was pretty thrilled. I don't think he ever thought that I would be the one to join the Air Force, because in his mind, it was all about pilots, and he knew that I wasn't going to be flying. So he was a little surprised, and that was the easy conversation. But when I told my mom, I took her to get a soda at a place in our local mall. And I said, "Mom, I have something to tell you." And about that time, this woman walks in and she's in an Air Force uniform and her pants are a little bit tight, so they're high up around her ankles. And she's wearing these flat black shoes that look like men's shoes. And so it wasn't a good start to have the conversation with my mom. And I said, "Mom, I'm going to go into the Air Force." And she just pauses. And she looks at this woman, and then she looks at me and she goes, "You have to wear those ugly shoes." And I'm going, "Mother, I don't have to. I can wear pumps. I'm buying you pumps." And I still remember that night. Every time I put on a black pair of pumps, I remember that day. The only thing that she could relate to was the shoes I was going to have to wear. And in the end, I just said, "Mom, remember how fast 4 years of college went?" And I'll live different places and you can come visit me in all those different places. And I got her calmed down for my first 4 years that, as you talked about, turned into 36. But those were my early years. Someone just stopping me and saying, I think you'd be a good officer. And it made me think I would like to do that. And the other thing about it is that in the military, you move. And you move to a bunch of different places, and it gives you a chance to really learn what your country's about or a different country is about and get to know the people and the environments. And so it just kind of began to blend with things that I found important in my life.
Beautiful. Such a heartwarming story, Wendy.
Thank you.
So, in hindsight, when she processed it, do you think she responded differently? Like, were there any other feelings, emotions, which sort of she conveyed later on? Or did you process those emotions and think differently as you sort of took on that big decision?
As I got closer to actually earning my commission, one of the things you have to think about is the oath of office that you're taking. And one of the commitments is essentially that you do what it takes to follow lawful orders. And that could be, as a military member, that you might have to kill someone. And that is a very sobering thought. And as I thought about it, what went through my mind was, you know what? A mama bear will do anything for her babies. And if I'm in a position that I have to take care of people who are around me or the people I love or my nation, it's worth it to make that decision. And so I did. And I'm grateful to this day that I was never responsible for that personally and never had to kill anybody with my own two hands. But it was something that I took very seriously and thought very carefully about before making that choice.
That's really powerful. Yeah. So, help us understand what your role really entailed, what drew you to this side of military service, and how did it shape your view of leadership?
In the military, most people think about soldiers and guns and tanks or sailors and ships. And in the Air Force, they think about flying. That's our persona.
Yes.
But what a lot of people don't realize is that there's a business side of the service too. And particularly in the Air Force, they actually assign you to a career field from the moment you graduate. And that career field, and that is where you're going to spend your entire career, however long that might be. For me, I was assigned to the job of contracting. And it was affiliated with what are called acquisition teams. And so there are teams that have different skills. You'll have engineers, you'll have logisticians, you'll have program managers, you'll have financial people. And then the contracting person, you have lawyers too. The contracting person is the one responsible for taking requirements and putting them on a piece of paper. And they do everything from help figure out how to tell that story to contractors who might do the work, to pricing it out and deciding whether the price that the contractors are offering is a good price, to putting everything on paper and making sure that you know what the schedule is, to approving payments for the contractors once they've accomplished what they said they would accomplish. It's a super responsible job. And really, by law, the contracting officer is the only person who has authority to actually spend U.S. taxpayer dollars. So it's a huge responsibility. And that's what I was assigned to do. And it was a great match because I was a business major at Texas Tech. So as much as you might hear that people get assigned to jobs that they have no idea what they're doing, I actually got a job that was right down my alley in terms of business. So
Awesome. And what started as a 4-year stint turned into a 36-year-long career, right?
it
So,
did.
what made you stay, Wendy? Were there any defining moments along the way that kept you going? Were there any times when you said, thank God it's only 4 years?
You know, it never did. What I ended up finding was I loved the people.
Mm.
I loved their passion for what they did. I loved the integrity they had. I'd worked in jobs where people just didn't have the commitment to the job that I did. And in the military, I found I worked with people who cared as much about what they were doing as I did. They operated with integrity, and that was an important value for me. and the mission. I loved the jobs I had. I had great experiences, and every time I got a new job, it was something completely new. And I was always learning, and I was having new experiences and working with new people. I went from watching contractors build things and then report back to their program teams that they were doing things the way they agreed to do it in their contract. And that meant they got to get paid. So I started out doing that. I taught. I spent 4 years teaching. And then I actually started doing some contracting. I spent a year in Pentagon doing training. I bought satellites, integrated launch vehicles. I bought munitions, bought aircraft, led aircraft teams. I mean, a huge variety of experiences that I never could say no to. And when somebody opens up a door for you, it's like, let's just walk on in. And 36 years later, it was amazing that I was able to stay that long. I remember when I was in IOTC, one of my favorite commanders for that particular unit told me that I might be lucky to get 20 years. And I thought, okay, well, you know what? Maybe in the back of my mind, really what I want to do is try to get to that 20 years and get that promotion that said I did good at a 20-year point. But I found that I had bosses that had confidence in me that I might not have even had confidence in myself about. And they just opened up doors for me all along the way. Mm. It was an honor and a privilege every time I turned around.
That's your humility, Wendy. And I still want to unpack this. I know you told me last time that for you, it was not about being a woman. It was about being different. There has to be something about you which stood out, which was your unique trait.
And that's such a good question. Often I don't think about it, but I go back to some experiences. I think one of the things was I wasn't afraid to contribute to the problem solving. And I had leaders, for example, they had training sessions in the military at 3 different times in our career. And the very first one is really all about leadership. Yeah. And you're in a small group of about 15 peers, and they come from very different career fields. I was one of 2 women in my particular small group. And it was early, not very many women in the service at the time. So people didn't listen to us that often.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it was like, I will still throw things out there. I mean, you can listen to me or not, but I'll still throw things out there. And one of the times that I started thinking I must be doing something right, we were at this project thing, and they put us into these little scenarios where we had to figure out how to get over a pond of water without touching the water. And there were tools there that we could use. Little Project X games is what they called them.
Right.
And on a number of occasions, I would try to contribute to the problem solving. And usually people were pretty good, but there were some that were a little harder. So I would throw these things out. And I threw out a suggestion, and everybody just completely ignored me on the suggestion. So as it turned out, on that one case, we didn't make it. We didn't succeed. Apparently, my solution was the right solution because they stopped the whole thing and they said, we're going to go off to use this exercise location. And Wendy, we want you to be the leader. Everybody has to listen to you. And so we worked together and we figured it out. We figured it out a little too late in the problem solving process. Mm-hmm. So we got partway through, but we had the right solution. And it was interesting. Over that additional time, I figured out that the only way for me to be heard was to find a guy who would listen to me. And I found this guy in my seminar who would listen to me. So we would actually talk about solutions, and then he would present it to the group, and everybody would, they'd love it because it was coming out of his mouth. And so we had one last exercise before we were graduating. And he got named to be the leader for this big exercise for our small group. And we were competing against the whole school. And he goes, I will do it, but only if Wendy's my second. And my whole section just paused for a really long time about whether they thought that they should agree to let that happen. But in the end, they did. And together, Andy and I figured out the whole thing. And we just blew the whole school away. Our solution was right on. We were the first to finish across the whole school. And it was interesting that you think, how did you get it? Well, when I was young, I found the voice that people would listen to, and I would partner with that person to come up with solutions. And then it was okay for me at the time because it was all about doing the mission and doing the mission well and getting whatever project we needed to get done. That was the most important thing. It didn't matter how. And for me, it wasn't about me, it was about the mission. So I found my way. I found the people that people would respect and would listen to. Together, we would strategize, and then that person would be the mouthpiece for getting it done. And my very early years were all that way.
So strategic. Wow. You had kept the story for later, Wendy, clearly, right?
Well, you asked me and it finally hit me. That was a way to help get things done. I use that technique in many of my other positions. So Andy was my cheerleader. He was my advocate and he was my partner in problem solving. And he saw value in what I had to say. And it's a lot of fun to work with people who want to hear what you have to say. And I would look for other people in other jobs that I went to who fit that same mold. And then together we would do a lot of really good things.
And I think it's so strategic. So how did you figure this out?
I don't think anybody told me that because I came into the Air Force very early on when officers came in larger numbers. So we were kind of a new thing in the environment. And I think sometimes you just find somebody who will listen to you. You have the conversation, you watch them deliver the message, and you realize that's how people are listening. And if people listen, that's okay. And then you just do it again and it repeats. And so it was just a learned behavior for me. I just learned what was going to work and then I adopted it.
And on that note, Wendy, were there any mentors in your journey?
Some people are good at seeking mentors. I never understood that. I didn't come from a military family. I didn't understand about mentors. I didn't know how to ask for mentorship. But I think there were people in the background who were watching to see how I did at the jobs and giving me opportunities based on my performance in one job to do something in the next job. And it took me a long time to realize it's okay to ask for something. I often would just say, I'll do whatever you need me to do. But there was a time about halfway through my career, probably at about the 18-year point, when I was in a position working with a guy who was kind of jerky in the process after 9/11, and he was telling us all to stay home, and he was being large and in charge, but not very productive about what he was doing. And finally, I just looked at him and said, I can do your job. And it took him aback. But then I told my boss, I said, I can do that job. I'd like to have the job. They called it wing commander. It's like a mayor of a city. And the next thing I knew, my name went forward. The next thing I knew, I'm assigned to a base. The next thing I know, I'm promoted into that position. And it happened within a year. I was shocked that I would ever have that opportunity. And it was an amazing experience. And I don't think it would have ever happened if I had not been vocal about it and said, I can do that job.
So be your own cheerleader.
You do. You have to realize that you need to speak up. You need to ask for opportunities because sometimes people just won't match you because it's not what they're used to. And it's not that they don't think of you or they don't respect what you do. They just don't think of you in that role because it's not what they're used to.
Yeah.
But they will if you ask them to.
And how did this thought process come about?
I think I've learned to pay attention to what works. And I learned from other people and how they go about doing it. I don't know that I had a lot of conversations. I was an observer. I like to watch people and listen. And I listen with more than ears. I listen watching body language. I like to watch how people react to other people. And then the positive reactions become my lesson on what works.
I love it. Yeah.
And so I would mature my own behavior, my own way of communicating, my own asks, my own participation or problem solving skills with my peers, and then with the people I'm responsible for leading based on what I saw and what I admired in others.
You also spoke about feedback last time. So, love for you to share that story and help others get that perspective.
I'd be happy to. And it really goes to really caring enough about who you're working with to help them grow. You can sit there and tell them they're great and they're doing great all you want, but what you're not telling them is what they're especially good at or what they could and how they could improve. And it wasn't until, probably about 15 years, and I had a boss who actually gave me feedback. And it was my first female boss. And she went through our evaluation criteria and took the time to read the different things that they would expect you to demonstrate leadership on, or behaviors that they would hope to see from you as you moved up the rank. Her name was Judy Stokely, and she led our program office in Florida. And she called me and we sat down and she goes, Wendy, the only thing I have really here to give you is you need to take advantage of opportunities as they're presented. I see that there are things that you could or should be doing that you haven't done, that you just don't go out and do. You kind of wait until you're prompted. And you should know to just take those opportunities, just go do it. And I hated getting that feedback because she caught me. I knew that's how I was. I was always hesitant. And, we talked about being an introvert, and a lot of it's that I'm just an introvert. And so being out front or leading the way is a little bit harder for me in a really public way, just taking that kind of ownership. But what I loved about that is she gave me permission.
Yeah.
And she opened that door for me, and she gave me permission through her feedback to be what I thought I should be, but I didn't know I could be and didn't know I could do. And it was just perfectly timed for the job that we had at the time. And it was remarkable because I could see how giving good feedback to somebody, the good, the bad, and the ugly, is really, really important. The things that you do good is important to understand, so you don't change those. The things that you need improvement on, you need to understand those. If you really want to be better, you really need to listen to that feedback and then go do something about it. And some people are good at getting feedback and receiving feedback, and others aren't. So spend your time finding those people who really want to be better at what it is that they do and help them with honest feedback.
Great. Let's shift gears a little bit, Wendy. Share with us some of your experience from your overseas assignments.
So I've traveled overseas in a couple of my jobs, but the time that I really lived overseas was in Iraq. And it was right after Desert Storm. I went over there in middle of 2005. And we were trying to restore order and help Iraq rebuild after Saddam Hussein. We also had the operations going on in Afghanistan. And the job I had responsibility for all the contracting that was going on in Iraq and the contracting that was going on in Afghanistan. And so we were bridging those two nations together to try to be more efficient with how we use resources, because contracting officers were in really great demand at that time. And the Air Force was the only one who had military people that did it. And so until the Army and the Navy could figure out how to train their folks, the Air Force was carrying a really heavy burden. But that aside, what I really appreciated was the Air Force actually gave you a cultural exposure to what was going on in the whole environment in the Middle East. And I think one of the things I learned that I really valued and I kept my eye open for was how important women were in the culture. And you wouldn't know that, or you wouldn't think about it. But the reality was children grew up mostly with their mother's leadership. The men were typically out and the women were responsible for raising the children. So to change a culture starts with the women. And it was remarkable because a lot of times the women are often dismissed. But when you think to that next layer of understanding, the women are really, really quite powerful. The other thing I learned too, and I love this, and I had the opportunity to go up into northeastern Iraq, and we went to visit mountain villages and the schools in the mountain villages where the children went to school. We stopped at this one school, and the kids were all dressed up because they knew we were coming, and we were bringing school things. And so I'm handing the stuff out, and the kids come running up, and they're so excited, and they stand in line, and I hand them something, and they're great, and they run around. And then the next kid comes up, and then the next kid, and we're just laughing. And I can't understand a thing they're saying. They can't understand anything I'm saying, but you can see it in their eyes, right?
Right.
And the next thing I notice is there are kids that I'm going, I've seen you before. The big kids are running around and then getting back in line to get more.
Oh.
And I caught him. I said, you've been here already. And the look in their eyes were like, how could you catch me? And I just loved it that children are the same everywhere. They're clever, they're fun, they laugh, they play, they push each other around. And it was just a really heartwarming experience for me to see that and to get out from behind my desk and just go meet the people that we were there to try to help reshape their futures in a positive way at the time. So it was just a real experience. And then the one last thing is back to the women, particularly in Afghanistan. When we were there, the women were starting businesses, they were going to school, they were getting educated, they were helping to shape their government going forward. And it just really broke my heart when we pulled out and the Taliban took over, because the women have lost all of that again. And it just breaks my heart.
I can totally understand. But I still want to end this story or this whole experience on a positive note.
Okay.
When you said that kid came back,
Yeah.
it just talked to me about the presence you gave. And I feel leadership is really about that, because you often see these leaders trying to multitask. And I feel that is just so important in leadership. So for me, that's what stood out, Wendy.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Emma. I really appreciate that, because I think that's important, that people matter
Yeah.
and what you have to say it matters. And when you're at the table, everybody has a voice and should have a voice. And I've always valued that. Your different experiences and your experiences are always going to be different from mine. And I can learn from that, because I know I have blind spots. I just don't know which ones they are. And I'm reliant on you to help me understand where my blind spots are going forward. And the only way to find out is to keep my mouth shut and let them talk.
Love it. And yeah, it could have been such a transactional experience. Just give away those things. Like you said, language wasn't common. You wouldn't have even realized.
I look like all of them. No, you don't. I've seen you.
It's a beautiful story, really. You brought in efficiencies, you restructured systems, there were massive transformations. Love to hear again in your quiet leadership, something which you're really proud of.
I'll tell you what, this is another case where I asked for the job. And it was a big job. It was a pretty new job in the Air Force at the Pentagon level. And in our annual budgets and the things that we do for the Air Force and really across the Department of Defense, and Congress was really after us to better understand that for this reason. A lot of times what we're doing are buying services. And that means people to do maintenance on our aircraft, or to help advise us on big program decisions, or to build roads and build buildings for us. And those are service contracts that we will hire people to do. In Iraq, for example, we had companies that would come in and they stood up housing for everybody. They provided food for the people. They took care of our waste management and our wastewater, and they took care of us. Those are service providers. Almost over half of the budget that we got every year went to those types of contracts, and nobody was paying attention to us. So Congress said, you guys need to do something differently. And so in the Air Force, they created this job called Services Acquisition Program Executive Officer. And the person who had been in the job was a really smart person, but for a couple of years, everybody was really frustrated because the decisions came very slowly.
Yeah.
And I thought, listen, I can do that job. I want to do that job. I can see ways to make this better. And so I got that opportunity. And it was my first job as a one-star general. So I had a very small team. And I was responsible for services around the whole Air Force, $65 billion worth of work. My boss said, you have 100 days to come up with a plan. I said, okay. I sat with my small team. We strategized some options. I laid out the options to my boss at the 100-day point. I said, we can either do it for them or we can teach them how to do it. And she said, we're going to teach them how to do that. And so they gave me their full support as we went out to shape the program, to sell it to these 4-star generals who owned these huge organizations.
Wow.
Who we had taken all their authority away. And we said, listen, if you are willing to play with us for a couple of years, we will delegate things back to you and we'll measure your progress each year. We'll give you additional authority each year based on your team's ability to perform according to our expectations. And so my team came up with metrics for measuring good performance. We spent time going out and teaching them how to oversee their programs and do good business management with their teams. And we brought them in and actually taught them how to do it and helped them succeed. It was fantastic. It was probably the most fun I've ever had because I got to do something and shape it the way I always wished my programs shaped. And I'll tell you, it's all about building the team and valuing everybody's experiences. And we would bring our customers in and sit down with them and say, hey, listen, we are about ready to redo this contract. And they've been doing maintenance on your aircraft for the last 5 years. And we need to do it differently. How are they doing for you? What do you wish was different about the program? And they would look at us and go, well, nobody's ever asked us that before. And I'm going, well, shame on us. You are our customers as we create this contract. So help us make it better for you. And it was great. And people really enjoyed it. Congress loved it. They said everybody should be doing this way. I still remember going in to brief one of the congressional staffers, and they looked at me and rolled their eyes with my briefing charts. And I started going through it. And they would ask me questions and I had an answer. And they said, well, how are you doing this? I said, listen, they can't do everything at once. So our plan is to go out and show them how to do it. The next year, we're going to have them take the lead, but I'm going to sit beside them so that they can see what good questions they might still be able to ask. And then the last one, I'll just go in and observe, and we'll just turn it over to them and observe. And they go, well, that makes a lot of sense. And we go through the whole process. And at the end of the 2 hours, they look at me and they go, well, what was your name again? I'm going, okay. That's success, right?
Finally.
Because you have a plan, you had an answer for every question they had. It was a logical solution. And at the end, they go, this is really good. And that's when you know you hit the ball out of the park. And I loved my team, and they were as passionate about helping us get it right. They loved seeing success. They loved training people on how to do things right. And it was just a wonderful memory and a wonderful experience, and something that I'm super proud about.
Yeah, it's beautiful, Wendy. And, I really want to unpack this. I mean, clearly there were people, for lack of a better word, watching you not succeed, right?
Yes. Oh, yes. Some of
Right.
them were even internal to my office. So it was interesting. Yeah.
So, were there feelings of self-doubt, imposter syndrome, loneliness? I mean, will you agree that leadership is lonely?
100%. It is. And it can be very lonely. I will say in that particular job, I had leadership support in a way I needed for that particular job. But I have been in other jobs where it is very, very lonely, especially as a woman. You look around and there aren't very many women, and women react often to their experiences different than men, because men have a lot of other men to go to and share those experiences with. But Emma, I go back to this, and I don't know, is it so much that I'm a woman? Is it that I was a contracting officer and people don't know what to do with contracting officers? Is it because I didn't go to the Air Force Academy where it's a small class, 1,000 people who are really tight and have similar experiences that they can go back and share those bonds of similar experiences? I was kind of an outlier in so many ways in the Air Force in my early years. ROTC graduate from Texas, not an academy graduate, woman, yes. New as a woman, yes. Contracting, everybody loves to hate contracting, so we really don't want to get to know you because we don't want to be your friend, or you're going to tell us we can't do something. And so there's a lot of different ways people look at you, and they'll pigeonhole you in certain ways that you may not even realize. And so it's, how do you get out of that? How do you overcome that? How do you realize that people are going to look at you differently and take the time to learn who they are, value who they are and where they come from, so that you can talk to them in a way that makes you less scary?
So, in a sense, you were like an outsider. You just put it in simple words, right?
Yes, I think so. Yes. You're different. You're different than other people. You're in a different role. You come from a different background. But I think it's also who you are too. And for me, I was an introvert, so I had a lot to overcome too.
Yeah.
My brother is a total extrovert. He thinks everybody loves him. This is the other thing as an introvert I learned, is there are other introverts in the room. So your job is to go find that introvert because they're all standing by themselves, and you just make friends with them.
Love it. So many pieces of wisdom. Like you said, we can go on and on. But I do want to unpack with you, what was that mantra which helped you deal with the fact that you're an outlier, you're different, you're maybe an outsider?
For me, and it was all about doing the job and being successful. Because when you're in the military, it's not just about you or your unit. You're doing something for your nation.
So you were purpose driven.
My purpose was to do the very best I could for my nation. They were counting on me. The taxpayers count on me to be wise about doing that. I want them to trust me. Contractors need to understand that if I say I'm going to make decisions in a certain way, I will do that, and I will show you how I've made that decision. To me, it's all about truthfulness and honesty and transparency. And I'll tell you how I'm going to do it and then do it. It was all about doing it right for our nation because they're depending on us to do it right.
Beautiful. So I think I mentioned last time, I'm very closely involved with a not-for-profit in India, right?
Yeah.
And when it's a not-for-profit, you talk about purpose, but how does one transfer the same values to a for-profit? Given that you're on the board of now so many organizations, does that question resonate with you?
It does. And I will tell you, I make decisions on who I work with based on shared values. And so I think that there are some who have or want me to do things different than what I'm comfortable doing as a board member. So I make my decisions based on people whose values resonate with mine. And sometimes even then it's challenging because you know what? CEOs they're type A personalities. They're just right all the time by definition because they're the boss, right? And so even then, it's learning how they make their decisions. It's learning how they think. It's learning how to tell them something they might not want to hear in a way they can hear it. And sometimes it takes a long time to figure that out. And other times they're just super receptive to anything anybody has to say because that's who they are too. So nothing's much different. It's just learning to read them as people and learning how to adapt to them in a way that they can hear you.
Yeah. Any moment you consider a failure or something that didn't go as per your plan in these 36 years?
Yes. And it's a great story. I go back to my time with Judy Stokely, and it was such a great revelation to me. I had a team who had been working on a strategy for how we were going to do a contract with one of our contractors, a long-time contractor. And we'd been doing business with them for a really long time. And we had a lot of data on what it cost us to buy this product from them. And we had built a strategy based on what we thought was an understanding that our boss at the chain would be willing to do something a little different. So we built this strategy, and as it went up through the chain for approval, and it had gone all the way up to the Pentagon and our boss, her lawyer said, you can't do it. And so we were stunned. And we get a phone call from my boss, Judy, saying, hey, she's not going to approve this. And we had 2 weeks before we had to be on contract. And so, as you can imagine, we are just devastated. And so I go into my room and I have this kind of long room with a door on the long end. And I'm sitting at my desk with my back to the door. Tears are rolling. And I'm going, no, they can't see me cry. I'll get through this. And just started coming up with this strategy. And I called the contractor that we were doing our business with. And I said, we're coming out. We're just going to sit across the table with you as long as it takes to get to this agreement. Can you get all these people lined up? And they said yes on the other end and had the whole plan worked out. And I hung up the phone and I turned around and Judy was standing at the door and she goes, how are you doing? And she kind of backs away when I look at her. And I said, you know what? We are super disappointed, as you can imagine, but we're going to go out and negotiate. I'm going to go tell the team now, this is our strategy. We'll get it done. And she goes, and those bright blue eyes told me that you had something figured out, because apparently my eyes get very blue and they get laser light when I'm focused.
Wow.
So I got up and I went over to the area where my team was, and they were crying. They were really upset because it was so devastating. And I lifted up my head up high and I stood up and I walked in and I said, okay, here's the plan. They can't beat us on this. This is the right thing to do. We have all the right information. If they want us to go back and do it in a traditional way, we're going to. I've already lined up this. You guys are going to be on the plane. I'm going with you. We'll get it started. They've got all these people who are going to be there at the table so we can talk through it right then and there. And it was night and day. Everybody got super excited. They were so grateful for a solution. They were so grateful for a plan. And Emma, when I walked away, I went, they are so dependent on my mood.
Wow. Absolutely.
That the people that you work with and for will feed off of your energy. And if you go in depressed and sad and helpless, they will feel the same way. It's your job as a leader to overcome those fears and help set the tone for the way ahead. And I will tell you, I've even had those conversations in today's environment as people are fearful about what the administration's doing. And I coach leaders. I said, stop that. You cannot talk about that and that way in front of your workforce.
No.
They're looking to you for leadership. They're looking to you for guidance on the way out of that. And I said, you've got to push down however you feel about it and go find the right way forward to help your business succeed. And that experience was so crucial. I think you always think you know that, but it was so real for me at that point that it's always been a lesson learned for me and anybody else I can coach. Step up, man. When you're the leader, you got to step up.
Beautiful. You know, I totally get it. Like, you have to inspire as a leader, right? But then what about vulnerability? Did you ever bring vulnerability to your leadership journey?
Of course. I'm a wuss. Yes, of course. And there are times when you do get frustrated and you go, oh man, this is, I was right there where you were 2 days ago, just an hour ago. And I said, I'm with you, but this is, we're going to get through this. This is how we're going to do it. And I do think it's important to be who you are. Mm. But there are times when you got to step up and be someone who you don't want to be and go forward to. But boy, I'll tell you, I'm not afraid of being who I am and being proud of who I am or being sad about what's going on around us. But even then, you've got to show hope, right? You have to give them hope. And I've been in 2 big organizations where I had to take 25% personnel cuts across my organization. That's huge. And that's very personal for the people that you're dealing with. And my objective was always to be, I'm going to tell you what I know, when I know it, and when I can. Mm. And in the meantime, I'm looking out for you, and we're going to find a place that actually is going to be a better fit for you than what you're doing now. So it's partnering with them.
Yeah.
And that's the vulnerability. So I think as a leader, you have to be aware of where you fit and what your team needs in going forward.
Beautiful, Wendy. This was so amazing. And as we end this conversation, which I don't want to end, but I have to, Wendy, over the many conversations I've had, and we talked about it even last time, I personally have also come to recognize that there is this, unspoken code, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I feel that code quietly shapes roles, expectations, and perceptions. And I do want to say sometimes more for women than for men.
Yeah.
My question is, did you feel this code at play in your journey of 36 years? And if yes, how would you feel that it should evolve?
It's a really good question. And I think the easy answer is that women always feel like they have to work harder than men to get the recognition that they need. And I know I worked hard. I'll tell you a story, and it really helped me look at myself a little bit differently too. Is I had a really good friend who decided to leave the Air Force. He was on a great track for promotion. He probably would have been a general officer, but he decided that he was working too hard. And so he decided, I'm going to go ahead and retire from the Air Force now. And I saw him a number of years later, and I said, do you miss the Air Force? He goes, I do. And I said, what's different? And he goes, I realized that I was working hard because it's who I am. And I'm going to be that way, whether I'm in the Air Force or I'm working on the outside. And Enma, there's such wisdom in those words. And it caused me to sit back and go, would I have been any different had I been anywhere else? Or is it just who I am anyway? And for me, it's just who I am. I'm going to work hard because I want to do the best for who I'm working for. I owe them that. They're trusting me to be that way. I don't know that everybody feels that way. I think we have new generations that think maybe a little bit differently than that. But I realize that everybody has a boss. And my job is to be the very best I can for whoever that boss is.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Wendy. And I can't thank you enough for doing this conversation. It really gave a lot of perspective to many.
Thanks so much, Emma. You do a great job. Thank you for letting me be a part of it. And I wish you the best and everything forward.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, do hang on for just one more minute. I have a request for you. If you haven't already, please subscribe to Atlanta Diaries on Spotify, iTunes, or whichever platform you follow. Do join us in our mission to empower and inspire by sharing the podcast with a friend or colleague. It will be great if you can share on the social media platforms you follow, be it LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or any other. Please leave a review or rating on iTunes or Spotify. It really helps us reach a wider audience. Lastly, I wanted to share with you that many of my coaching clients and listeners have created a cheat sheet with their key takeaways from the episodes. I invite you to consider jotting down 1 or 2 key takeaways as you navigate your amazing journey. Have a wonderful rest of the day and see you next week for another inspiring journey on Atlanta Diaries.